All right, so I recorded a few videos about the primal self, and if I think of anything more to add to what I've said, those 3 videos I will say something. But I'm also feeling a strong sense that it's important for me to share my experience of passing the 96 level initiation. Anyone who just comes across this video and has no idea what I'm talking about, 96 level is there's way too much for me to describe to explain it to you, but I'd recommend going to Kim Michael's videos, and he explains a lot of background to all of this, how the world was created and so on. So this is basically for people who know that they're approaching the 96 level or may have passed also already, and so you'll know what I'm talking about. So for this first video, I just want to talk about, the lead up to the experience, and just share with you, like, what the feelings were inside of me, what was going on, because you may relate to it. You may recognize what I'm talking about. So so I passed the initiation sort of somewhere mid last year, and I just recall sort of in the latter half of 2024, let me see, 24, last year was 2025, yeah, so in the last part of that year, I remember feeling just this sense of a certain, more and more frustration, like, I just could feel this build up of, just like, like squeezing a toothpaste tube and the lid's on, and there's just this build up of pressure, but it just won't release, and that's what I could feel. I just felt like, things have got to change, but I just, I didn't know how to change things. I didn't know what to do, and I was really, really focused on working on resolving the self-focused self. And I didn't have enough of these teachings that we now have, because the masters have brought through so much more in such a, much more of a specific way about passing this level and about what the 96 level initiation is. And I didn't fully understand. I just sort of thought, I just felt like I was trying to resolve the self-focused self, and like it was oneself, which really wasn't helping, because, it's a multitude of cells, and there's lots that's built up there. So I just felt this overall sense of, push, 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 and I was pushing myself hard, wanting results, but also, just feeling frustrated. And then at the beginning of 2025, the Ascended Masters announced that there was going to be a huge release of light on the planet, and they carefully explained how it was going to bring light to the darkness, to begin to flush out, to show what's been going on with the fallen beings on the planet, with the power elite, and it was going to stir things up a lot. And the sense I had when I was listening to this was kind of like a bit like, I thought it was awesome, but also, a bit like, oh, there's more pressure, and since going back and having a look at these dictations just recently, I can see that they said it's going to stir it up for spiritual people, because it's a release of Christ light. So all of a sudden now we've got a whole bunch of us who are like somewhere just either side of the 95th, 96th level, and and it's happening so much faster and it feels much more intense because of that release of Christ light. It's kind of like, I reckon without that release of Christ light, we probably could have sat kind of safe in our separate selves and not felt that pressure. But, it's like push, 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 it's like getting to that end point of giving birth, like, it's getting full on. So for me, it was getting really, really full on. And not long after that, the revelation of, this is what's going to be happening, all of a sudden, a massive tree fell on my bus, destroyed it. I went into massive shock and trauma because I was inside the bus. So, it was, a very frightening sort of experience to sort of nearly lose my life and just deal with the aftermath, like it was major PTSD going on, like it took lots of panic attacks. And I had to bring in, a big trauma coping self to cope with that. And, looking back, it was sort of, the spiritual self that I had been building up until the 96 level. I brought that in as my major coping mechanism, because the thing I was most upset about, there was a lot of, real compassion and support, but there was a couple of people here and there who they just slipped up in what they were saying and everything, but it had a really heavy impact on me. They'd sort of made comments, while I was in the trauma that, it was something to do with karma or whatever. And it really sort of, the hackles went up and I just defended myself because I had to, I was in protection mode. I was really trying to protect myself. Things started to sort of settle down, but this, strong protection self, it stayed in place, and it basically was running on the premise that I did not want to be challenged by anyone, because, when the people were saying that stuff, I'd felt challenged and I wanted to defend myself, and I did defend myself, but I kept that sort of, well, no one's allowed to challenge me. I kind of knew there was a problem, but I just had in my mind, like, no one's allowed to challenge me. And then, I began to play it out. I basically went into challenging mode, and I challenged my friend Yulita. I can't recall exactly what about, and it doesn't matter what about. But I challenged her, and, this was very confronting because, we have a close friendship. So it was confronting for her. And, I know I was sort of quaking inside doing it because I just had this fierce mindset at that time. And she stood her ground, and she challenged me back, but not in the same forceful way I was doing it. I was coming from a very self-focused perspective. Yulita was coming from the Christed perspective, and she had her own lessons to learn from it. I had my own. So that's what happened. Then, almost a week later, there was the Holland conference, and in that conference, Jesus gave a dictation where, he was challenging the self-focused self, and because my self-focused self was, totally operating, I took it intensely personally. Like, he was even using some of the words that I'd used. Like, I think I'd said to Yulita, like, you have no authority to challenge me, something like that, I think I said. And Jesus used those exact words. And I think Jesus was trying to, deliberately sort of, push, giving a really big pushback, like, this, and it was something I needed. I needed a really strong challenge. But, I just sort of dug in after that. Like, I just thought, that's an imposter. Kim's sometimes bringing through the masters, but not always. Maybe he's getting Jesus wrong. Like, I just came up with, crazy ideas. And it became like this, like, madness. Like, I just remember, for a month, maybe 2 months after that, I'm not sure how long this played out for. It wasn't too long, but I was just sort of like, just caught up in the madness of, not wanting to be challenged and defending that, and that meant I had to push the masters away. I had to push Yolita away, Kim away. Like, I just had to push away everyone that I love, it was kind of full on. And then finally, a dreadfully sad event happened. My niece committed suicide, and I basically, just immediately went into, a mode of just, wide open heart to support my family in their grief, and particularly, my brother, her father, and, the immediate family. I just was just straight away in, like, I'm just going to support everyone. And, my heart had opened up from that experience, because I'd had to close my heart off. And in that, with my heart open, I just realized, what have I done? What have I done? And, I feel emotional talking about it, because it was an emotional time, it was very, very humbling, particularly to see that I had projected in such a way to someone who's such a close friend in Yolita, and, she forgave me and everything's fine now. But it just was a breaking point where I realized, just stop it. Just stop this, I can't keep up this facade any longer. And I just let it go. I just let all of it go. I let go of the charade. I just realized, I just have to trust. I just have to trust that everything's going to be okay. And yeah, and there's more that happens after that and everything, but that was the point, the point in time when I surrendered. Because it's not, you don't do anything, you just let go, and you'll know what it is you're letting go of. You may not even know consciously what that belief is, but you'll know. If you're sitting there and you're feeling this sense of frustration, you will know that you want to let go. And it's okay to let go. Trust me, it's okay. It's not just okay, it's wonderful. But so I'll stop this first video now, because there's going to be more to come, so that I can share with you more details about this. So thank you for listening, and I hope this helps.